Coming up on the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast, we're going to discuss the tight end values for fantasy football, the must-have late-round tight ends in 2024. In years past, players like Rob Gronkowski and Travis Kelce have been round one picks. This season, we're having more parity. Some of the top 5 tight ends are all getting bunched together in rounds 3, 4, and 5. We're going to break down why it might make sense to fade those top 5 tight ends and attack some of the values later. All this and more starting right now on the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. That's right, folks. It's back-to-back weeks, by the way. I feel like at this point in the podcast circuit, I have been just bouncing around. It's Sky one day, it's Jeff another, then it's Ben. But you know what I said? I'm done with it. I'm ready to be in a monogamous Wednesday podcast situation with only Derek Favret. Go follow Derek_Favret on Twitter. Derek, what's going on, man?
What better way to close out midweek than to be on a podcast with you, Bobby?
I love that. Honestly, closing out the Wednesdays from now on, by the way, me and Derek are about to take – this is our last must-have show, and we're going to take a trip to Negative Town over the next few weeks and talk some busts. Some guys you should stay away from. But today we're going to keep it fun, talk about some must-have tight ends. Now, Derek, before we get into the tight end stuff, let's talk a little bit about the Razzball. And if the people don't know and you're not in the Razzball, shame on you. You got to be in the Razzball every single year. We had 312 teams, 21 divisions. How are things going so far? Do you love your team?
Yeah, I'm actually pretty happy with it. We are at the end of the 5th round, so right at the 5-6 turn. I've made my 5 picks, and yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. Pretty balanced. Got a couple running backs, a couple wide receivers, and a tight end that we're probably going to talk about a little bit tonight.
Yes, honestly, so far I have been very balanced, by the way. I went 3 running backs, 3 wide receivers in the first 6 rounds, got Hollywood Brown in the 7th round. So I'm really excited. I also have a Jordan Love, Josh Jacobs stack. So me and Matty Styles this season, go Pack go. Super stoked. Still waiting on my tight end, though. Chilling, trying to feel things out here a little bit. Maybe one of the guys I want is on the show today. We're going to break it down. So, Derek, let's get into this right now. Now, I told you, by the way, this is a must-have tight end show, okay? Not only did I not pick a top 5 tight end, neither did you. So that means me and you are playing the patient game at the tight end position if we can. So What's your thoughts about the top 5? Kelce, McBride, Kincaid, Andrews, and Laporta. What's your thoughts about those 5 guys?
Yeah, like you said in the intro, in years past, it's been either Gronk and or Kelce and then everybody else. This year, there is a lot of parity. There's, in theory, 6, maybe even 7 tight ends going into draft season who we could project to be tight end 1 or tight end 2. Which is really nice because that, really limits the pressure on trying to get one of the top guys or if you wait too long, you're not going to, you're going to be playing from behind, every week. So it is nice to have more of the younger guys, especially that are coming up that show a lot of potential. But it is deep as well. Probably the deepest field of tight ends that I've probably ever seen. And so that gives us, if you're willing to wait and load up on other positions and wait on tight end and be patient, you can do that without as much risk as we've seen in years past.
Yeah, and I think the other thing really is there isn't that number 1 anchor tight end that's going in round 1 like we saw with Rob Gronkowski and Travis Kelce for years, which kind of, I think, artificially props up the other tight ends because Kelce was going in the first round and for the past X amount of years. Now, the reason why I'm not all in, and by the way, the first 2 rounds, probably not taking tight ends, maybe Laporta in round 3. But when I started looking at the top 5 tight ends, what I've realized is I'd rather wait to see if one of those top 5 falls to me, maybe in the 4th roundish range, 5th round, just to see, because when you're looking at the numbers, I don't think there's one guy who I think is going to be the 17 PPR points per game guy that we saw Travis Kelce and Rob Gronkowski. If you look at Sam Laporta last season, you have to remember Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jahmyr Gibbs both missed games. So we really didn't get – I know he was a rookie. He was great as a rookie. But if you just look at the 10 games played with everybody, Montgomery, Gibbs, and also Amon-Ra, his fantasy points drops to 13.1 PPR points per game. Still good, but that's not elite round one, round two differential that I'm looking for. Travis Kelce, when Rashee Rice last year became the starter, 13.3 PPR points per game. So his production dropped. Now you add Xavier Worthy and also Hollywood Brown. Mark Andrews, by the way, when I did this process, might be the most exciting. 9 healthy games last season when he played the full complement of snaps. He averaged 14.6 PPR points per game. That would have been tight end 1 last season. Dalton Kincaid, by the way, Joe Brady. I know he coached under Sean Payton. You think Jimmy Graham. There's been a lot of talk about him being the number 1 option. We've seen coaching staffs like Sean Payton feature Jimmy Graham as the number 1. Also, Thaddeus Moss at LSU, the lone season with Joe Brady, had his best season in college as a tight end. So I like that as well. And finally, Trey McBride. If you look at the games for Kyler Murray with DeAndre Hopkins and Hollywood Brown, so when there was a wide receiver 1, what did Zach Ertz actually perform? He averaged in 13 games, 6.6 targets, 11.1 PPR points per game. Now, I think McBride's a little bit better at this stage in his career, of course, but still,
Great.
Wasn't number 1. It's none of those guys scream 17 PPR points to justify a top 24 pick. Thoughts about any of that madness before we move on, Derek?
Yeah, no, I think you really hit it on the head. I mean, Sam Laporta is being drafted as tight end 1 in many places, and of course, he did have a great rookie season, but much of that his fantasy production was buoyed on the fact that he scored 4 more touchdowns than the second most tight end. He had 10 touchdowns last year, and next in line was a few of them with 6. So, you bring him back to the mean, and we're not talking about Sam Laporta. As exciting as he was, we're not talking about him as much as we are right now, because of those tight ends. And then on the flip side, you had others who were productive in receptions and in yards and didn't get into the end zone. And, just the same way, we're not really talking about them as much. So it just shows you, especially with tight ends, how important it is to get into the end zone for fantasy. And it really makes a difference with tight ends, and not only how they impact our teams, but going into the next year, like we're seeing right now, how they're perceived on draft day as well.
And there's just like heading into the offseason too, like Mark Andrews, by the way, I think a lot of people are forgetting that it was kind of a wash year for him. Injured, in and out of the lineup. But like hearing reports that Zay Flowers really hasn't stood out. Like, by the way, this offense, he could still be the number 1 option. And he did have a big season just a few years ago. So him and also like Dalton Kincaid, like Josh Allen's legit. Not saying he's not. There is no alpha number 1 on that roster as of today. And everything out of camp does say that Kincaid could be that guy as the 1. And when you're telling me Josh Allen's number 1 target, you're probably looking at very good tight end 1 numbers. So I think that's why I'm kind of like, man, I don't feel like I need to be aggressive on anybody right now. See if one of those guys falls. And if they don't, guess what? We're going to talk about some guys right now. And let's get into some of those must-have tight ends who, by the way, you could get a few rounds later, who I think will be great, because you got to remember, you can now draft a solid running back or wide receivers in rounds 3 and 4 instead. Draft your tight end 3 rounds later and still get relatively about 80 to 90% of that production these days. So what's the first must-have tight end you got for us, Derek?
Yeah, for me, it's Evan Engram. Evan Engram, he led the league led tight ends in targets and receptions last year. And as kind of I was alluding to a minute ago, he only got into the end zone 4 times. But despite all that, he ranked 6th in fantasy for tight ends. Do we think that he's going to be in line for that many targets again or in receptions? Maybe not. Christian Kirk was out for some time last year, so that really allowed Engram to run from the slot a little bit more than in tight, which is really more Kirk's position. So that probably opened it up a little bit from him. So they might be a little inflated. If we're chasing last year's numbers, that's probably not where we want to be. But, that being said, Engram in that offense is a productive player, and there's no reason to think that they're going to go away from him by any means. He's, to me, probably, in the last of the tight ends who could, in theory, be a tight end 1 or tight end 2 for fantasy by the end of the year. And you can get him in the 7th, maybe 6th, 7th maybe even in the 8th round, because there's some people who are turned off by him. So, if you're in a position to wait for tight ends, which is actually one of my philosophies more times than not, Evan Engram is a name where you can plug him in and be really comfortable. He might get a couple more touchdowns this year. He probably won't get as many receptions, so it might balance out. He's probably comfortably looking at a tight end, 5, 6, 7, area where he was last year. He may be a little higher, he may be a little lower, but for the price and the value on draft day, he's definitely one I think that you can wait on in tight end. You can plug him in and be very comfortable.
Yeah, I actually like his ADP. So where he's going right now on Razzball ADP, and if you haven't checked it out, we've broken out 6 different sites on Razzball.com, Sleeper, Yahoo, all them, NFC, Underdog, you name it, we got it. Go check it out. Great tool. He's on average about 67th overall. And I'm actually a little bit higher on him, 66. So, I'm like all in right now on Evan Engram, one spot higher. But here's kind of and you brought up a really good point. It's the Christian Kirk thing. So I looked into the splits with Evan Engram, for Evan Engram with Kirk and without. So with Kirk last year, he had 11 games, 7.5 targets per game, 10.6 PPR points per game. That would have been tight end 9. Still very good, still rock solid. The 6 games where Christian Kirk did not play or left the game early, 10.2 targets, 19.7 PPR points per game. So, it was outrageous, the difference. But still, even when they have their full complement of weapons, he was still very solid for fantasy football. The other factor to this is no Ridley, no Zay Jones this season. They replace him with Brian Thomas and Gabe Davis. So the chemistry with those guys might take sometimes a rookie and also a new free agent. And listen, I can see early on in the year, Trevor Lawrence leaning on Evan Engram and Christian Kirk. And in PPR formats, you give me a solid 5 for 50 and sprinkle in a touchdown once in a while, we're cooking. I love every second of that. So I'm not stressed about it. That's why I like him where he's going right now. Let's jump down to the next one, Derek. You got more about Evan Engram?
No, I was just going to say, and he's the alpha there at the tight end position. Luke Farrell is the guy behind him, but, he finished the season last year with 13 catches. So there's really no one pushing Evan Engram. He is the alpha tight end there. He's not known for his blocking. He is known for his pass catching. So, he's a safe play. And like you said, the price is not outrageous for him.
Yeah, the price is right. But the next guy I'm really kind of one of my favorite targets is Jake Ferguson. So right now today, his ADP is 83 on Razzball.com. I actually don't have him that much higher. I have him at 76 overall. Might need to change that a little bit. But the reason why I'm kind of really into Jake Ferguson is last year, if you look at the Dallas Cowboys, there was that 49ers debacle. I think it was week 5 or so, and the 49ers just crushed the Cowboys. Well, after that, the entire offense changed. Dak went all in. CeeDee Lamb went off. But the entire passing offense went through the roof. And if you start looking after that game, there's actually a significant sample size where he averaged 11.1 PPR points per game. And that is very good production for a tight end last season. But the other thing about Jake Ferguson was last year was his first season really getting the playing time because Dalton Schultz was ahead of him prior to last year. And we have seen time and time again, it's really the second and third seasons in these full-time starter roles where these tight ends really take off. And that rings true with Dalton Schultz. If you look at Schultz, by the way, if you look at his 2021, he was the tight end 3 that season. That was his first really full season with Dak Prescott. Because remember, 2020, Dak Prescott got hurt. That was like the 5 games where he played and then he broke his leg or something. But that season, the first full season with Dak as a full-time starter, Dalton Schultz averaged 12.2 PPR points per game, was the tight end 3. So Dak has proven that he grows with his tight ends. He loves his tight ends. The other thing I like about Dallas is there's no true wide receiver 3. I know Jalen Tolbert's getting some news here and there. Brandon Cooks, by the way, is not a volume guy. So even last season, Ferguson already established himself as the number 2 in targets behind CeeDee Lamb. Now you're replacing Tony Pollard with an aging Zeke. I don't think they're going to start funneling more targets to the running back position. And also you're talking about a top 10 offensive line in football. So Jake Ferguson is going to have plenty of opportunities if the line is good. So That's why I really like where Ferguson's going, the history with the quarterbacks, the history with the offense. What's your thoughts about Jake Ferguson?
Yeah, I'm with you there too. He's one of the guys I'm definitely targeting later. And talking about going into the offseason on a high note, in the wild card game against Green Bay, he had 10 receptions for 93 yards and 3 touchdowns. So if that doesn't scream, game planning through the offseason to involve your tight end more, I mean, I don't know what does. So I can't say that the Cowboys are known for being sharp in the in either the front office or in the coaching booth, but even I would be smart enough to realize that we got to get this guy more involved in the passing game, with CeeDee Lamb as a complement there. So
yeah, and he's a dog. He's a tight end guy. He's a dog out there. He's got a good blocker. He's got everything. He's the next coming. I think he's gonna have a big season. Yeah. But honestly, Derek, you got a deeper name that I think anybody can get probably with the last pick in their drafts. Who's the next guy on your list?
Yeah, and you kind of referred to Mark Andrews before, but yeah, here's his understudy. And I would say, arguably, he is the only tight end handcuff worth drafting. Not just because the fact that Mark Andrews has missed game. He's missed 28% of the games over the last 2 seasons, but not just because of that. But the fact is when Likely's been on the field and actually had a true opportunity. I mean, he's getting. He was averaging over about 4.5 targets per game when Andrews was out. And that resulted in over 12 fantasy points per game, and when Andrews was out. So, he's shown in a couple of years now, he's still a young guy. A couple of years, he's shown that he can, be a successful tight end in that scheme with Andrews. Frankly, I'm just waiting to see when Baltimore starts playing the 2 tight end set and actually throws to both of them. I mean, because that, to me, that's just a weapon waiting to be unleashed there, just opening it up. And I mean, both tight ends are shown to be very good, very productive. And, if you're going to, keep the linebackers honest, run out both tight ends. And now you've got Derrick Henry in the backfield and, of course, Lamar Jackson out there. I mean, that's just screaming, playmaking ability. And of course, he's being drafted as the tight end 19 right now, at the very end of drafts. And I mean, here are some of the names that are going around the same time: Tyler Conklin, Cade Otton, Hunter Henry. Give me Isaiah Likely in every scenario against those guys. And like I said, even if you're going to sit on him until or if Andrews gets hurt, I mean, you're sitting on it could be a championship tight end right there.
Yeah, I think if you have the deeper rosters and you have Andrews, it's definitely something you should look at for a bench stash. I agree. The issue is, the double tight end fantasy, it's like there's not a lot of situations historically other than you could think the Patriots when they had Gronkowski and Aaron Hernandez. I know it's happened before, but there's not a lot of chances, a lot of opportunities where we've seen 2 tight ends really flourish for fantasy. However, here's some glimmer of hope. In 2017, when the Buccaneers were under Todd Monken, they had 2 top 20 tight ends that season in PPR points per game. Interesting. That tells me that not only can it happen, but it happened with the same offensive coordinator. So that's good. In 2018, this Todd Monken offense had 4 players average 11.6 PPR points per game or more. Why I say that is because if you think about it, it's really Bateman, Flowers, Andrews, and Likely now in the passing game. And I love Derrick Henry, but he's not going to command 70 targets out of the backfield. And Lamar Jackson's a mobile quarterback. He's not checking it down anyway. So there's opportunities there. Now, granted, those Tampa Bay offenses were so pass heavy that maybe the volume allowed them to get that. But at least I know the coordinator is open-minded to put his best players out there. And he's proven in the past that he will have 2 top 20 tight ends at PPR points per game. So I don't hate the call. I just think that without an Andrews injury, I just don't know how much real upside there really is for Likely.
Yeah, and again, that's why I say, he might be the only handcuff, because a true handcuff that you want to roster because of that. But, and also, as a counterpoint to what I was suggesting, Baltimore does not have at least going in, doesn't have one of the strongest offensive lines. And so, running 2 tight ends out with a shaky offensive line, that just might not work. But, there should be some game planning in there to at least get them both in there and get them both out into the pass pattern at some time. But again, he's going to be your last pick or one of your last picks. You may hold him if you've got the space, and it may turn out to pay off. In volumes with Andrews. If he gets hurt, but and if he doesn't, then you drop him and you move on when you need other players. So it's really a no risk pick that late in the draft, but the upside is potentially tremendous.
I think it's one of those picks where I think it is a little dependent on Mark Andrews if you get him. If you get aggressive on Andrews, hoping he stays healthy, and let's say you go aggressive in the 3rd round, 3-4 turn range, then it makes sense if you have maybe 6, 7, 8 bench spots, maybe a little bit deeper, just to stash likely. Yeah, because honestly, you really only need 5, 6 bench spots anyway, and you usually rotate those guys. So I think that and by the way, there is a chance. Matt just said on the chat here that Isaiah likely is going to be better than Bateman. And there is a chance that happens because Bateman hasn't really proven anything yet. And so there's a chance that Bateman becomes the 3, and there's a really good chance of that. However, let's get down to the last one here, Derek. I want to talk a little bit about a guy I've already talked about a little bit, and unfortunately I'm just getting more biased towards him every day. It's Pat Freiermuth. So Freiermuth I talked about a few weeks ago. Then training camp happens, and now I'm just like, well, I'm all in. And Pat Freiermuth's becoming like one of my favorite late-round tight end targets. He's probably my favorite. So reports come out of camp that he's been a standout in this offense, playing with either Russell Wilson or just Justin Fields, does not matter. He's been the number 2 option in the offense behind George Pickens. It's been universally said that he's number 2. By the way, and there's really not a lot of competition for that spot. The loss of Deontay Johnson has created a vacuum for target distribution in that offense to really funnel it to basically 2 guys and maybe the running backs. Van Jefferson, no thank you. Roman Wilson, who's the 3rd round pick, just got hurt. He's week to week now, and that's going to set him back even further. The other things I really love about this offense for Pat Freiermuth, other than the additional potential target increases because of guys like Deontay Johnson leaving, is the offense. Look at Arthur Smith, by the way. On average, the 3 seasons with the Atlanta Falcons, 145 tight end targets per year. I know that Kyle Pitts was a disappointment, but remember, it was Kyle Pitts and Jonnu Smith, and Pat Freiermuth's more of a traditional tight end. So I think that the offense is conducive for tight end play. And then on top of that, if you look at the quarterback landscape, right, whether it's Russell Wilson or Justin Fields, and I know Matt's on here probably screaming never Fields, totally fine. But Justin Fields just put up a ridiculous season with Cole Kmet, averaging 11.3 PPR points per game last season. And then Russell Wilson, if you look at his number 2 option last year, which was Jerry Jeudy, 8.9. So either way, you're looking at top 15 tight end numbers. And be honest with you, I think Pat Freiermuth is a much bigger threat in the red zone than Jerry Jeudy was last season. So I just think the offense, the situation around him, like, listen, and by the way, George Pickens is just ruffling feathers 24/7. He gets in a fight with the wide receiver coach. Everyone's upset with George Pickens. Who knows? Maybe Pat Freiermuth finds himself as a 1B. It starts getting a little more. So I really love the situation. What's your thoughts about Pat Freiermuth?
Yeah, I agree. When you look at Freiermuth's year last year, and he missed 5 games in the middle of the season, but he was really hamstrung by the quarterback play there. I mean, he had, when he came back in week 11, from week 11 through the end of the year, he had 2 red zone targets total in those games from week 11 to the end of the year, just 2. And he's shown, in years before that, he's a much better receiver than that. So, yeah, I agree with you. I think he's really there's an opportunity with him to really produce fantasy-wise because of the quarterback situation there. That whether it's Wilson or Fields, he's in a much better position than he was last year. And if you're just looking at last year's numbers, and those will tend to scare you off, I would say don't, because again, for where he's going in drafts, there's a lot of value there as well. So yeah, definitely I like Pat as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, it's just the cost too associated with this stuff, by the way. And like he's like his ADP right now is like 130. And so if you're punting the situation, if you're targeting more running backs, wide receivers, and you don't get one of those guys, and by the way, if you're not reaching for a tight end in the top 5 and you let those guys pass, you don't get them at your certain spot. Let's say you waited to the 4th round, they're all gone, and you don't want to reach for the next batch, and you keep just piling those other positions. Honestly, I'm telling you, there's something about this situation when you check off the quarterback, the play caller, and the situation, the surrounding talent. He checks all the boxes. There's not a lot of guys that do that. So I'm all in, but that's all we got today. These are our 4 must-have tight ends heading into 2024. Before we close the show, we want to make sure you're following Razzball Fantasy on YouTube, IG, and TikTok. And make sure you jump over to razzball.com. We have a lot of exciting stuff. We have the slot versus wide tool coming back this season. We have premium split tools that you're going to love. Wins versus losses. We're going to have people writing up analysis on those all off season and into the regular season. But Derek, before we close the show, tell the people what you got upcoming at Razzball and wherever else you post your content.
Yeah. I'll be writing home versus away splits as a new tool that we have, like Bobby just said, free from the site. So I'm going to be doing that, as well as dabbling in DFS arena, both blending our free tools and our pay tools to bring you some DFS picks for the weekends. I'll be producing that every Friday.
Nice. Love it. And make sure you follow us across the board. We got Matthew Stiles, Sky Gawasco. We got Ben Wisely. We got Jefferson. Jeff Kazar. Listen, Jefferson always throws me off because I'm like, is that his last name? But it's just, I don't know what's going on there. We'll have to talk to him in the future. I actually have a show with him on Friday. I'll ask him. But anyway, make sure you follow him at Bobby LaMarco. We're dropping the top 150. Make sure you jump over to razzball.com. We have premium rankings for every position, the top 150, Dynasty, whatever you need to win your fantasy leagues. Once again, I'm your host, Bobby LaMarco. I want to thank my co-host, Derek Favret. Go follow us both on Twitter. We are out of here, folks. Let's go.